and welcome to another episode of the Practice Forward podcast. I'm your host, Owen Bush. I'm joined here today with Shawn Hamlin from Hamlin Design Group. Hi, Shawn.
How you doing, Owen? Nice to see you again.
Doing great. It's wonderful to be here with you, and it's great to represent some of the Capital Region architects. We're neighbors. I'll just say a brief word about Shawn before we start talking here. Shawn Hamlin is the founding principal of Hamlin Design Group, where he leads civil and educational projects that thread sustainability, cultural legacy, and public impact. From net zero museums like the Stephen and Harriet Myers Underground Railroad Interpretive Center, to large-scale adaptive reuse projects like the Harriman Building 5, Shawn's work blends technical rigor with narrative intent. Across every project, he's asking, how do we build with memory and with meaning for the next century? So welcome to the show, Shawn. I'll just say today's show is sponsored by Scan to Plan. Scan to Plan helps architects see what's really there through LiDAR scanning and high precision documentation. They deliver clean, reliable existing conditions data, ready for BIM, modeling, and decision making. From adaptive reuse to tight tolerance retrofits, Scan to Plan gives design teams the confidence to move fast without second guessing the site. So you can visit Scan to Plan at scantoplan.io. All right, Shawn. Well, so glad to have you today. It's been
nice
a while since we called. Yeah. And so, as I was saying, we're here. I'm actually in Brooklyn today, but, Scan to Plan is based in Troy, and Shawn is based in Albany, right across the river. And, there's something about our area that's almost like a black hole in people's consciousness. When you say, like, people across America, they think of our area, I don't know, you say the Capital Region, you say Albany, whatever. People seem to have some concept of upstate New York, but they don't really seem to have much of a concept of this amazing area we live that has so much historic preservation, so much cultural history. I mean, at the beginning of the country, Albany, New York, and Boston were all kind of like three major cities. And so in some ways we have just as much like deep history and cultural heritage to be unearthed as those two places. And it's I know that, both of us are really trying to bring some attention back to that. So anyway, thanks so much for joining, Shawn, and looking forward to hearing more about what you're doing.
Thanks, Owen. It's a pleasure being here. And you're right. Upstate New York has probably peaked in the 19th century after the Erie Canal, and then it kind of just stalled after that. But there is a lot of history, a tremendous amount of history, and some of what hopefully I'll be able to share with you is some of that history that has been perhaps forgotten, but is important. And I think it can really serve to be an impetus to really bring attention to the Capital Region.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, it was a big motivation for me. And I even, we're going to talk about your project with the Myers Center. I actually, was I was, very interested in documenting a lot of the kind of unknown historic spaces in the area. And about, I guess during the pandemic, about 5 years ago, I did scan the first residence. So tell us what that is, Shawn.
Well, the Stephen and Harriet Myers residence is a residence of abolitionists that were living in Albany, New York in the 1800s. Quite amazingly, the couple who are the founders of the Underground Railroad which is a non-for-profit educational organization to preserve that history, is a husband and wife team, Mary Liz and Paul. And this husband and wife team started because they are, I'm going to use a term, by no means is it pejorative, but they're bookworms. He's a teacher,
Yeah.
and he's a journalist.
Yeah.
They started doing some research on historic places and stumbled upon the history of Stephen and Harriet Myers. And while we're all familiar from school on the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman, the role that Stephen and Harriet played, they were a newspaper publisher. And they worked as the mastermind of organizing routes for slaves as they came up from the South with their initial goal heading to Canada. So they worked with all abolitionists throughout upstate New York, made connections. They published a paper on it. And so they were quite the couple, the power couple, as you could say. And
and they were African American. Let's just say that, right? So they were.
They were. Yes.
So were they freed? Were they freed slaves, or were they were born free and then? Or...
My understanding that they were. That was my understanding that they were, and they worked and lived, had various jobs. So they published a paper. I believe he also worked part-time. And so again, they were quite the couple. And they worked with abolitionists who were white, the Shakers, as you know, in our area of upstate New York. There was a large organization of Shakers they coordinated with, as well as other abolitionists all throughout New England. So it's fascinating history that was right here in upstate New York that was somewhat forgotten. In fact, the home that they lived in is in a predominantly African-American neighborhood called Arbor Hill in Albany, New York. And it's just a simple townhome that's really had been forgotten. So the couple, Mary Liz and Paul, did their research, and they established a non-for-profit that purchased the property, the townhome that they lived in, and they started to run tours for visitors to explain the backstory and all of those that were involved in the abolitionist work at that time.
Yeah.
So they've been doing this for over 20 years. And about 3 years ago, they published an RFP, a request for proposal, stating two things. They were looking for restoration of the townhome, and two, they were looking to build a cultural center where they had a larger cultural center or museum, interpretive center that they could display various works, and also be a little more inviting for the public to come in and entertain the public. And so our firm, we submitted, we were selected as the architect. And the project was rather modest when we first started. It was to be placed next door to the townhome, which is on the National Historic Registry, the actual residence. And so we were placing the new interpretive center just to the east of that building. And so as we started going through programming, visioning sessions with the client, and detailing that, this project just grew. And it was a little different, Owen. Most of my career has been in the K-12 and higher education.
Sure.
Where you look at budgets, you look at programming differently. And while the mechanics of programming and problem solving are the same. The issue regarding budgets is completely different.
Yeah.
When you're looking at this type of user, such as a museum, you're really talking about, to be honest, though it's education, you're talking entertainment. Museums are competing with entertainment. On the weekend, people make a decision whether or not they're going to go to the movieplex, stay at home and watch Netflix,
Right.
or they're going to go to the museum, a museum, and have an experience
Hmm.
for them and their family. So how you look at it, how those projects are budgeted, is slightly different. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the business situation of how the client responds. I say all of that because as we begin to go through the project, there were interests that the client felt was important for their project to stand uniquely as a different experience from other historical museums within the Albany area and upstate area. So
Yeah.
for those not knowing, there is, you have the Schuyler Mansion to North Albany.
Right.
You also have another mansion that's in South Albany. And there are historical sites that you can tour.
Hmm.
Those are rather static, somewhat difficult to relate to most people today.
Yeah.
And perhaps really not very well visited by most people, by many people.
I mean,
So they've wanted to stand
thinking
alone.
about, it's 2025, and there's a lot of these historic house museums. I've scanned probably most of them, and got to know a lot of folks like Paul and Mary Liz along the way. But yeah, I mean, how are you going to get anyone to go to a place like this? And it's not just like a eat your vegetables kind of thing,
I like that. I like that, Steve. Eat your vegetables. You're absolutely right. That is what they wanted to avoid. They really wanted to have a place that truly attracted people, captivated their interests, and also allowed them to see how this history was relevant to their lives today. That it just wasn't a snapshot of an old photo that you look at once and discard.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of decisions, and one of those decisions that were made is one that I didn't see coming. So I began to build a vision as we went through our programming of what this building, how this building can look, how one would move through this building. My client, Mary Liz and Paul, had a completely different vision. And when she explained that, Mary Liz, the co-founder, I was at a loss. What she explained to me, she had read an article in the Altamont, I believe it's Altamont Times. Altamont, for those that don't know, is a small little village in upstate New York, and they still have a newspaper.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful little community. And in that newspaper, there was an article about a family-run timber framing contractor that actually had preserved the what's referred to as a Dutch barn, timber framing.
Yep.
And this contractor, his name is Tim Rao, a very fascinating man. And I believe you should talk to him as well, Owen, because he probably could very much use your services.
Yeah.
Goes throughout upstate New York. He buys dilapidated barns. So, Owen, you're probably familiar with, if you drive up or down 87 or east to west on I-90 along the Mohawk River, you'll go through rural areas and you'll see barns, some in fair condition, some in very poor condition.
Sure.
Well, his business model, which is almost unbelievable, he would approach these farmers, offers to buy the barn, And then he disassembles the barn, tags the barn, cleans the members, and then reassembles the barn and reuses that timber, which is
Wow.
fascinating at a lot of levels. It's
Yeah.
fascinating, one, on an architectural level and also on a technical level.
Yeah.
Not only is it sustainable, because that barn was just rotting potentially in the field, our particular barn was not. It was being used as such. It also, technically, these barns are easily 50 to 100 years old, if not more, are
Hmm.
made from timber that's truly the old hardwoods that were populous throughout the Northeast.
Yes.
So they had this vision of buying and reconstructing a barn, which would serve as a historical artifact that would kind of bring the past to reality
Hmm.
and the museum. So that became our design partee. Actually, a timber frame barn that exists in Fort Plain, New York. That's the county, on the Mohawk River. In
Hmm.
fact, we have a video on YouTube where we met the farmer, we went to the barn, we saw the
Incredible.
sheep in the barn,
Wow.
and he gave us some history. That
Yeah.
barn, we believe, based upon the type of joinery, was constructed in the 1740s.
Wow.
So that predates the Civil War,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is not all that uncommon for barns throughout the Northeast. What
Uh-huh.
is uncommon is that it still exists right there at the Mohawk River. One of the things that they believe why it still exists, because the British would come through and burn down barns, because that's where people kept their food as well as any armaments during the
Yeah.
revolutionary period. But that barn was moved back from the river, and it's been on that property ever since. And another fine point that also made this decision easy for Mary Liz and Paul was the fact that this property that the barn lived on had recorded slaves here in New York State.
Hmm.
So this barn predated the predated the freedom that slaves had here in New York State.
Hmm.
So we took the timbers, we've modeled the building three-dimensionally, the timber structure, and we created a envelope that covers that timber frame building. And that envelope,
What kind of
that
envelope?
now,
Can you describe it for our listeners? What kind of envelope it is?
absolutely. So it's a high-efficiency exterior construction.
Hmm.
So what we mean is that it has a very high R value, exceeding all standards for New York State and also for green building certification. It
Hmm.
is aluminum standing seam exterior, as well as rock wool insulation. And structurally, it is supported by mass timber.
Mm.
So we went to the heights of designing a building that had a low carbon footprint, and mass timber structures, CLTs, um, and columns really allowed us to have this unique type of structure. We believe that once it's constructed, and construction hopefully will be starting in the fall of this year,
Mm.
it will be the first of its kind in upstate New York. A fully mass timber structure, net zero. On
Yeah.
site, we have we have high efficiency heat pumps, as well as geothermal wells in the site that go down plus 400 feet. We have 10 wells.
Wow.
We also have solar panels on the flat roof portion of the structure.
Hmm.
This building has received a grant and has been recognized by NYSERDA.
Mhm.
And so we had the CEO of NYSERDA come out and speak at an event for this project. So we are very, very pleased and honored to work on such a project at this high technical cutting edge for energy and sustainability.
Right. That's incredible. So, I mean, this is really such an amazing case study in so many different ways because it's an adaptive reuse project, it's a historic preservation project, and it's a cultural, you know, cultural. What do they call that? Cultural maintenance.
Interpretive center.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
So
it's called interpretive center. Yeah.
interpretive, but I mean, essentially, it's a it's kind of the trifecta all at once because
Yeah.
you're also saving it. Not only is it historic barn, but you're saving all the embodied energy that's in that barn, both in the materials and the everything that went into constructing it. For our audience, I think one of the reasons that architects are so interested in adaptive reuse is because it's not just about destroying the building and putting it in a landfill. It's also about maintaining all the embodied energy that's in the building itself. And there's also embodied energy in every single one of those beams that came from these hardwood trees that were felled that we don't have any more of. So,
Absolutely.
so there's just, when you're destroying a building, you got to think about not only, the waste and the landfill and all the other impacts that has, but also, all the embodied energy that's there in the building itself. So when did this, so, I mean, obviously this is like a cultural and historical project. When did it really turn into, I mean, obviously you've got kind of a bias this way, Shawn, because you're always focused on adaptive reuse and sustainability, right? But when did this really become kind of such a major sustainability project?
Well, the owners, our client, realized, as we mentioned before, that they needed to stand apart. They really needed to have a building they thought that complemented or exceeded the programs that were to occur in the building.
Right.
Again, just from a practical business standpoint, you need to drive eyes and attention. If you want people to come, you have to build it. That's why Frank, that's why we have the Guggenheim, Frank Lloyd Wright, the Guggenheim in New York City. Why build such a very unique building that looks like
Sure.
nothing around it?
Yeah.
That is because you need to drive people. You need to drive eyes. You're
Yes.
making a statement. And our clients saw that. We discussed this at length. So from the beginning of our project, it basically tripled in size. The budget tripled. And we went through several iterations. Um, the interest in the project also through the planning project, because they were seeking, private donations for this. They're a non-for-profit.
Mm.
And it also began to attract the attention of various state and federal grants as we began to talk about what the building was, what purpose it was to serve, and then secondly, how we were constructing the building. So,
Yep.
as you said, Owen, it was checking all, let's say, the right boxes.
Mm.
And so we are, again, we're very excited with many of the features of this building, and it's been a very, very exciting trip experience.
Yeah. Well, so this, tell me about the living building challenge. That's something that that this building is qualifies as, or
So many people are aware of the term LEED certified building. Now, LEED is just one of several organizations that provide green certification. So the Living Building Challenge is one. It's an international building accreditation company. Their approach is a little different than LEED. LEED was developed by builders, engineers, and you have a system of points. So if you do something, let's say that is sustainable, you put in bike racks, you get 1 point. If you put in LED lights, you get 2 points.
Right.
Living Building Challenge is a little different. It has various goals or levels of certification. And those levels of certification are not only technical, relative to energy, the material, but it also has more holistic kind of objectives. So it talks about density, air quality, impact to a community relative to the purpose of the building, how people are approaching the building. To give you an example, they actually have a desire in the Living Buildings Challenge that speaks to how a building or a site relates and contributes to a community. And that's something that resonated with my clients, Underground Railroad. They wanted their facility to be a focal point and a resource within the community that they were in. So they had a path that went from north to south. Now, if you can imagine this, Owen, where you have a city block, a rectangular block, and in many city blocks in the Northeast, you have it populated with buildings. And so for you to go from street A to street B, you have to walk all the way to the corner intersection and then around to get to the next street. That's down here. Well, as cities begin to decay, of course, you have buildings that collapse. And so now people began to create paths through blocks that never existed, walking across where a building would stand. Well, that was such the case in this neighborhood. There's a wonderful little bodega that sells, I tell you, the best fried chicken wings in Albany. And so the neighbors in the community will walk through the property to get to that bodega.
Right.
And Mary Liz and Paul, when we discussed it, we said, we're going to put a building on that property, but let's build a building around the path that has served the community now for 20, 30 years.
Hey, that's real technology there, Shawn.
Yes. They were very, very open-minded. We had wonderful discussions about what that meant as far as security, what that meant for our building design, what did that mean, and what can we anticipate. So we have this actual walking path through the middle of the block. We even put bike racks along the way that would service, and benches that they will maintain, that allows that connection from one part of the neighborhood to another part of the neighborhood as that path is cut through. And that type of communal response to the community, needs of the community is something that the Living Building Challenge promotes. And so our client resonated with that. And also the holistic as well as approach with the environment.
That sounds. I mean, Living Building. I got to learn more about this. To me, I something that keeps coming up over and over again with the different guests I talk to is how there are different frameworks in the world of architecture that sort of carry with them an implicit bias towards new construction, right? Because, for example, we model in Revit, right? We make models in Revit. And we make models of existing buildings in Revit. And as you know, existing buildings, they very rarely, they're often really out of plumb. They have things at all kinds of different angles. Everything is askew. and yet it's very difficult to model that because the software is designed for designing new buildings. And it just does also seem like a lot of these LEED accreditations and a lot of these other sustainability things, as much as they're trying to be champions for sustainability, I also think there's some biases there that push people towards doing new construction, which, as we were saying, it ignores all the embodied energy in these existing buildings, and it ignores the cultural, it ignores the historic preservation. And so I don't know. I would like to see a more honest conversation about, what are these frameworks that we're using, and how do we kind of rethink them to really be about existing buildings?
I absolutely agree with you. I think, perhaps those of us who live in the Northeast with perhaps the longer or deeper history than other parts of the country. I know if you go to the Southwest or even in the Southeast, there's a level of age or historic structures, but not to the extent that you have here in the Northeast, especially through the old Rust Belt, where you have some very, very beautiful, unique buildings that are hundreds of years old. And as I mentioned in the Myers building, the barn, which predated, that was a treasure. And there's many treasures that need to be looked for that can be found.
Yeah.
I think many of us as architects, as you said, with the tools and even what's taught in schools, I mean, the sizzle of the steak is designing that brand new building. That's how architects are taught. That's what they aspire to. And there's nothing wrong with that in of itself, to dream. But there's a lot of other just as worthy dreams, as you talked about, with taking an existing structure, reusing it, and creating something that you probably did not imagine previously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's another thing you mentioned. I mean, I think that I think that the education system, the universities are not innocent in this either, because I've spoken to a number of professors who are just like, well, it's too confusing and too complicated to teach them about existing buildings. It's a lot easier for them to just, make something from scratch. And that's what they all want to do anyway, right? So, but I do feel like it creates a sort of inherent bias that, a real architect is going to build something from scratch. So tell me. So anyway, tell me a little more about how did this sort of narrative values, narrative requirements of the Myers Center kind of overlap with some of these other sustainability choices you guys were making in your sequencing logic? What's leading that sequencing logic? Is it the narrative or the technical requirements, the systems?
No, it was their narrative. They wanted to have a museum interpretive center that was a good community member. And they said, how can we, that was kind of a driving principle. How can we be the best community member on the block? What does that mean? And then, of course, you begin to go through and check the boxes for all the technical aspects, as we talked about, geothermal, you have solar. We're putting in mass timber. We're utilizing that. And the type of glazing that we specified in the building, all of those things begin to tick that. Other features of the building that they wanted to, again, to be a good neighbor. We are looking at one of the features that we may be looking at a little more closely to add to the building is to the building to be kind of a refuge in the case that there's a storm or a power outage. And so we're looking at placing battery backups in the building that will still run the building, light the building, cool or heat it for a period of time, so that it is a true community center in the event there was an emergency in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Now, some of these things, of course, are being reviewed and analyzed by our team, our engineering team, based upon some of the grants, federal and state grants, but they're also proving to be, in some of our analysis, really to be smart approaches in managing just the use of energy for their organization. So on some of the battery backup analysis that we're looking at, this would allow the organization to use the solar energy it collects, to use the geothermal energy, store it, sell it back to National Grid, or also to buy power on off times from National Grid. So the power that you buy in the middle of July in upstate New York when everyone has their air conditioning on, or in December when everyone has their, heat up,
Yep.
at 7 o'clock has a different price point than in 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So the idea of saying, okay, these battery backups will serve not only for emergency, but also help with the operation, because you're able to now purchase power or sell back power to the authority at key times that will prove to be beneficial, we believe, over the long run for this organization, as they are a nonprofit organization. So you've set the goal of how can we be the best community neighbor, and then all these other things fall in as you begin to analyze them and look at them and begin to say, yes, we want to slide this over and adopt this for this client. So that's kind of how that overlap works. Even the mass timber that we talked about. Yes, there's carbon. That's the low carbon. That was easy. But also there is beauty in knowing that you have a structure that we're highlighting, the existing structure of the barn, that's 1740 barn, and the envelope around it is timber itself. So we have the timber from 200 years ago, and then we have the young timber next to it. So, I mean, architecturally, and the play and how that's finished inside, so you have that experience, is something that we really salivated. We're really, really excited about through the design process.
Yeah. Now, were the sustainability ambitions, did they ever conflict with any of the preservation or narrative aims of the project?
Can you say that again, please? I'm sorry.
Sorry. Did any of the sustainability goals ever conflict with any of the narrative or the preservation aims of the project?
I can't say no. No, not really. There was no conflicts. Well, no. Okay, I was wrong.
Okay.
Now that I give it some more thought, this is a funny one, Owen.
Yeah.
So we have a site, as I told you. There is the Stephen and Myers actual residence, which is an old townhome, and then there is property that we're putting our new interpretive center. So we now have a property. We're putting a building on property that not only a building, but we're putting in geothermal wells that are going down 500 feet. There were questions that were raised by the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, about that, about the design of the wells, what, if any, artifactual or archaeological impact that would have on what was subsurface. And we're still having some of those conversations with SHPO about that. So there were questions that were raised.
Yeah, sorry, can you fill us in? What is SHPO?
The state, New York State Office of Preservation.
Okay.
So that is an organization that has oversight of buildings that are 50 years buildings or sites 50 years or older, or sites of historical significance. So because we are building a brand new building next to a building that's on the federal and state registry, this SHPO, or the State Preservation Office, they're obligated to review the project as well.
Right.
And that is part of the seeker process, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which all projects have to go through. So because of the historic nature of the site, it triggers a review by SHPO. That review began to call into question how we were designing our geothermal wells, and also the building and what archaeological impact that could have on the site. So those issues are going to be resolved. There's a plan that's going in place. But you had asked the question, what conflict, if any, was there? And that's a small one, but it's an interesting one between history and sustainability.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you have a really very sympathetic team working with Paul and Mary Liz there. Seems like you guys are great, all kind of on the same page about this. Seems like a really, really exciting collaboration. And I'll just say, I imagine it's kind of a legacy project for you too, Shawn. Just for I imagine you're African American as well, right? And
last time I checked, yes.
And I mean, as I was saying when we started, Albany is so full of this incredible history, and yet it's most of the time completely ignored, or not. People are not even aware of it unless there are folks like Paul and Mary Liz that are unearthing it, because they just, there was so much going on back in that period, and then it's sort of just been in the state of dormancy for so long, and there are so many neighborhoods like Arbor Hill that have just incredible bones and just incredible, but they're they really need to be revitalized. So I mean, Albany is it's an amazing place. It's an amazing place for the potential of what it could be. How's your process changed over time in terms of, let's say how you're documenting buildings, your analysis of existing buildings? Has that changed over time? Have you changed your kind of workflow stack over the years?
You're absolutely, yes, it has. It has, Owen. I mean, when I started 30 years ago in this business, I was working for a preservation architect. It was Mendel Mesig Way, Cohen and Hall. And one of the first projects I had was documenting the Pennsylvania State Courthouse. Now, we didn't have any of the fancy equipment that you have, Owen. All these lasers to scan and all of that. So we had a series of pictures, and my job was, as a draftsman, were to literally count the number of shingles on the roof, and I was to draw those on Mylar on ink.
Wow.
Many people don't know what Mylar is, and I'm using an ink pen. We didn't have computers.
And you would do that because transparent sheets that you can stack on top of each other? Is that why?
For that, and also Mylar was considered, because it's a plastic. It was a benchmark for permanency.
Okay.
So it would not be susceptible to mildew or anything else that you would have a piece of paper and it would rot. No, Mylar was plastic. It was permanent. So that's how all the preservation jobs were done in the past. I say that because from drawing on Mylar with ink and counting shingles on the roof, as you know, our profession has changed dramatically. Computers, CAD, You talked about BIM, Revit. Our office, we use SketchUp.
Uh-huh.
We completely model a building, a new building or existing building, three-dimensionally. We are happy to work with companies like yours that that provide the laser scans so that you can scan an existing building. And some of my K-12 clients, we would hire companies like yours that before we started our project, we would build into our price and our budget for the entire building to be scanned. So therefore, we have that cloud scan, that point cloud that we can then utilize and have accurate drawings, accurate existing conditions. And it's a huge curve, as you know, to educate a client about that, because that's a cost that they may say, well, I don't need to spend for those dollars. But it is a appropriate expense because if that is a structure that is going to have life to it over the next year, and a person is making an investment, you need to have that data beyond the life of the project, perhaps for future projects,
Sure.
20, 30 years down the line.
Well, I mean, when I'm talking to those kind of stakeholders like building owners or property managers, I find that, they often think about it as a cost for existing conditions. And they're like, okay, well, what would it cost to send 2 interns here for 3 days, right? What I say is that, it's not just about the existing conditions phase or the pre-design phase. It's actually about all the other phases that follow that. So if you want to spend hundreds of hours in coordination meetings with all kinds of consultants whose drawings don't line up, like, feel free, but this has, this applies to the construction phase. It also applies to the later life cycle of the building when you have facility management of the building and other things like that. So it definitely helps to have a single source of truth throughout the entire life cycle of the building.
Yeah.
And so that is, it's an upfront investment, but it seems to make a lot of sense for people.
And on the back end, with that data that you speak about, from the point cloud being used as existing conditions, the design, the new design, as we begin to walk through, technology has evolved where we now have 3D printers.
Right.
So our office has a 3D printer where we're able to now to print out various iterations of the building that can be touched, that can be felt by our client, to help them understand how this really will feel, as it were, literally, as a building, how it will look, the scale of it. Because many of our clients, as you know, Owen, they have a difficult time reading a two-dimensional drawing.
Yeah, of course.
And envisioning how that two-dimensional drawing actually looks. Well, the next step is the 3D, which we're able to, of course, show on a screen. We can create a model 3-dimensional. We can spin that around. But to have also a tactile actual model of the building in one's hand is just an additional layer or level of understanding.
Are you 3D printing a model of the building, or are you 3D printing certain things that you might fabricate at life scale?
All of the above.
Uh-huh.
Model of the building, portions of the building, so that it can aid in the understanding for our clients. Again, in certain avenues, we are in, as I said, the entertainment business. Museums are. So it was important that they had a model of their building as they were fundraising or getting interest, raising interest about their project. So they would go out to communities, they would go to various trade groups, both at the state level and national level, and they would bring their model of their building. Say, this is the building, and the model, was designed so that you had various features. You could see the timbers that were in the model. and also the envelope.
Yeah. Oh man, that's incredible. I'm so fascinated by this idea of this guy who's moving these barns all over the place. Um, I love to talk to him and help him out with that.
I think you could absolutely utilize your services.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's amazing
you know,
he can do it without that. I must have quite a
yeah.
notebook. Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about your educational work, which is probably the majority of the work you guys do.
Yes.
And so you do a lot of um, renovations of existing schools.
Yes.
So
So
when
primarily K-12, we're all renovations or renovations additions. If you think about the school districts that are in our area, we've worked in almost every school district in the capital region. I've worked in school districts downstate. And so most of the school districts have a entire gambit of structures at various levels of repair or at ill
yeah,
repair.
yeah,
There are changes in demographics that may require an addition to be put on the building. Some of the urban districts, that was my focus here in Albany, Troy, Schenectady, Syracuse. We've worked with, um, had a building stock that was several hundred years old, some of the buildings,
yeah.
that needed to have updates and renovation work. So you had those buildings to the K-12. On the high end, the universities and colleges we are working in, also their needs are also similar, but also a little different. Um, our universities and colleges, which are in a very interesting place here in upstate New York, or throughout the nation, as higher education is being re-envisioned
Right.
for many different reasons, from everything from student loan amounts and the expense of education to push for more technical or vocational. So they're in a competition.
Hmm.
And smart universities and presidents realize that.
Yeah.
So the type of structure, the quality of the structure, the sizzle on the steak, as it were,
Hmm.
is being felt. So they are undergoing renovations of their spaces throughout the New York State in the SUNY system, as well as the private sector. And so we have been privileged to work along with some of those colleges and universities in planning and designing for that. We just finished a project out in Morrisville, New York. And Owen, I don't know if you've ever been to Morrisville. Morrisville, if you travel due west, is a good hour and a half from the capital region. It is in the middle of rural New York State.
Yeah.
Beautiful country.
Yeah.
But the population is pummeling, dropping like a rock.
Yeah.
That college is trying to stay relevant. And so they are looking and have been looking to stay relevant to a new demographic. And so they are looking to provide varying and different course offerings for students to attract students from all across the state and beyond.
Mm.
So we've had a project where we had to reimagine a building that they had as a new athletic rec center. And it was a lot of fun to participate in that. So
Mm.
yeah, that's another existing building that we had to think different about. We removed the ice rink. We worked with that project with EYP. They handled all the MEP, and we did the architectural work.
Yeah.
And put in all new flooring, lighting, study areas for the kids to hang out. Um, and we interviewed the student body and other representatives on the college to really help focus our vision as to what this building could be.
Well, you must spend a lot of time thinking about how people are learning now versus how they did in the past, and how they will be learning in the future, right? Because you're developing things that you would imagine are probably going to stay in place for another 50 years or so. So,
Absolutely.
so what is it that you, when you're thinking about modernizing schools, what are you trying to protect and what are you trying to release or, get rid of?
Well, you said something that is right on point. You really have to think about how education is being delivered,
Hmm.
how people are living. I mean, architecture, you know, when I first started in architecture, one of the managing principals that took me under his wing, he had a statement that he drilled into my head. He says, Shawn, forget about all the theory of architecture is about light, space, and scale. That's what you learn in the abstract.
Yeah.
Bottom line, he says, architecture is all about people. It's about how we live.
Yes.
It's about how we perform our life activities. That's what architecture is all about. So
Yeah.
when you look at architecture relative to, the educational field, you have to look at how people communicate. How's that education being dispensed? How does a classroom work differently in 2025 than it did in 1950
Mhm.
or in 1970 when you and I were in school?
Mhm.
What were the models? How are these models changing? I mean, you and I both, all of us lived through COVID. What changes now with education relative to the fact that we know that it can be handled through a screen such as this
Yeah.
or YouTube and the impact of that. So those are some of the things that educators are struggling with, that they're
Mhm.
responding to. And we as architects, we also have to be on the balls of our feet to respond properly to those changes. We don't tell them how to educate. We have to have keen eyes as to know, whether or not there's going to be a curve pitch or a fastball or a changeup coming their way, and then to
Yeah.
be able to respond to it and work cooperatively with them. So whether it's education in that end or education, as I said, from the interpretive center, which they had a different paradigm. It's education, but it's education slash entertainment.
Yeah.
And that's slash, okay, how do we make a profit or how do we raise money in order to keep our program going? So
Right.
it is I think, maybe I'm a bit of a pinhead or dweeb because these are the things that I get excited about.
That's good. I mean, hopefully myself and all of our listeners are equally dorky. Uh, so, well, I mean, so anyway, just to wrap up here, Shawn. Um, so anyway, the Myers project was a big, basically a big departure from most of the work you've been doing, which has been primarily uh, educational, right?
Yes.
And so, where do you see this taking your practice? Do you see yourself doing more projects like this moving forward, or?
I mean, absolutely. And so we are hunting down, looking for opportunities to do projects like that. We hope to see more in the capital region, but we begin to look beyond the capital region
Sure.
um, uh, for uh, uh, for such projects. When you read about the great, architectural works, um, you know, not only do you need to have a good, talented architect, you need to have a talented and visionary client.
Mm,
You do. And
yeah.
so without a client with vision and passion, that's who I want to work with, clients that have vision and passion for
Yes.
whatever they may be involved in. Again, I'll bring up Frank Lloyd Wright. And if you read the letters between the Guggenheim family and Frank Lloyd Wright, there was tremendous passion on both sides. They argued all the time about the design of that museum, the construction of the museum, because they were passionate about their vision. And that to me is the ingredients that make great architecture, great spaces, great places to learn, to visit, to be a part of. Um, But, not every project, as we know, is like that. We still have to, have our supermarkets and our everyday functional activity as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, so is there anything that, are there like any tools or methods that you're deliberately avoiding that are coming down the pipeline that you're nervous about, or how do you feel about using AI in your work?
It's interesting you say that. I'm excited about AI. I had a conversation about a year ago with the photographer who we hire, and he talked about how I said, I want a night shot of one of the buildings that we finish on the campus down in New Paltz. And he says, oh, I can do that for you. I can have AI do that. And so I was flabbergasted. I says, really? He says, sure. AI can, I can take the shot in the daytime and run it through AI, and it's a night shot.
Yeah.
So, so my mind was spinning when he said that about a year ago. So no, I think that, again, as architects, we have to use all the tools at our disposal. In the 80s and 90s, when CAD came on the scene, and I realized that I would no longer need to use my ink pen on Mylar,
Yeah.
you become flexible. I think we're beyond the time, Owen, where you're going to send 2 interns to get existing conditions. That doesn't make any sense anymore. When you can pull existing conditions from an iPhone. So, we need to be adaptable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, really look forward to seeing what else is going to be coming out of Hamlin Design Studio. What you guys have on the books, and when is the Myers Center going to be completed?
So construction is going to start in this fall. So we believe that's about 18 months out. So that would bring us into 2026.
Okay. Well, I'm looking really excited about
Yep.
that.
So 2027, excuse me.
That's going to be amazing. It's going to reinvigorate that whole neighborhood. It's really exciting. So anyway, folks, it's Shawn Hamlin, Hamlin Design Group. Please check them out and look a little more deeply into some of these things we've been discussing. And Shawn, I look forward to seeing you around town, and hope to catch up with you soon enough. Thanks for all the
good, Owen.
work you're doing. I really look forward to seeing the Myers Center. Thanks for all your work on that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me yap on, and I look forward to seeing you in the future, Owen. Take care.
Great. Take care, Shawn. Thank you.